I feel like we could start. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, good night to everybody joining us today from across the world. And my name is Khadija, senior campaigner at Rise Up, and I'm honored to welcome you to today's webinar, Understanding the Ocean and Climate Nexus from International Policy to Frontline Solutions. We are gathering at a very pivotal moment. Just recently, the International Court of Justice affirmed that climate inaction can constitute a violation of international law, a landmark ruling that strengthens the legal foundations for climate justice and environmental protection overall. And this reinforces what so many of us have been advocating for. The protecting of the planet is no longer optional, it's legal, moral, and intergenerational. And yet, as we talk about climate, the ocean is too often treated as an afterthought, even though it regulates the climate, absorbs carbon, and sustains the livelihoods of billions. And the ocean and climate are not separate issues, they are deeply interconnected, and our policies must reflect that as well as our actions on the ground. So, from commitments made at UNOC in Nice and to the road towards COP30 in Belém, we are at a critical juncture. Ocean advocates, scientists, and frontline communities are calling for stronger integration of ocean conservation into climate frameworks, especially within the UNFCCC process. And if we are to avoid fragmentation and move toward holistic and just climate solution, this nexus must be prioritized. And today's session is all about bridging that gap. It's about spotlighting policy opportunities, showcasing on the ground innovations, and making space for the voices of those who are most affected and most engaged. We are thrilled that this session complements the launch also of our Ocean and Climate Cluster, a new collaborative space for frontline led action, advocacy, and knowledge sharing. So I just want to say a big thank you to all our speakers and to everybody who has joined us here today. We have a powerful lineup. So I feel like we should just dive straight into things. And our first speaker, just to set the tone, will be Nigel Maduro. He is an indigenous Kakatio community leader from Aruba, a sustainability scientist, and a frontline land defender slash activist. He also advocates for climate justice through his conservation work and community mobilization. So, Nigel, the floor is yours. Take it
Good,
away.
good afternoon, good evening, good night, good day, good life, everyone. Everyone here in the chat, everyone watching, thank you for coming here. Thank you for being here. Yes, so today we're going to be talking about climate and how it relates to the ocean and how it affects human life, but also just in general nature. And right now, in this historic moment, more and more people are talking about climate change and working towards action towards climate change. Climate is very much interrelated with human life. We always lived with it, we always were part of it. It's very interrelated. And as Indigenous peoples, we have known climate, we worked with climate for centuries. And here, now that we see that it is changing, it is going towards a very impactful way for human life, we must stand together and we must find ways on how to create actions to protect ourselves from climate change. As we see, climate change affects the ocean, such as sea level rise, storm surges, hurricanes, coral bleaching, but it also affects Mother Earth, the land. It creates droughts. It creates a lot of other issues that affects human life. And here, as we are here together, we will be talking about different perspectives on how climate affects the ocean and how ocean affects human life at the end of the day. And I had the honor to be a part of the ICJ court hearing when we went to the ICJ in The Hague for an advisory opinion. I was invited and in collaboration with the Pacific Island students fighting for climate change and the World Youth for Climate Change, and also the People's Futures Tribunal. And we were there to ask the world's highest court what their opinion was and how should we act about climate change as it affects our culture, our home, our livelihoods, our heritage, everything that has to do with human life, it also affects us directly, especially us smaller island nation states, especially indigenous peoples from smaller island nation states. Here, recently, 2 weeks ago, 2 or 3 weeks ago, they finally gave an answer on how member states should act upon climate change, whether it's adaptation or holding stakeholders accountable or holding private entities accountable. It became very clear on paper, on black and white, that the world's highest court mentioned and stated that states have an obligation to protect us from climate change and how it's interrelated within each other. So it was a historic landmark, and now member states can hold each other accountable. We could hold big polluters accountable, and we could also hold people accountable for their obligations for climate adaptation and climate mitigation. So here is how we could change the future of how we could take climate justice into our own hands and also receive climate justice as one, smaller island nation states, two, indigenous peoples, but also marginalized communities and people on the front line of climate change. So I am very honored to have the open work here and also to be a part of this beautiful journey that the Pacific Island students fighting for climate change. They started an idea about, yeah, it was like 27 law students, if I'm not mistaken, and it took 6 years. They had a vision, they had a goal, and now they set a whole precedence for the entire planet. So I am very honored to also be a part of it. It was a historic landmark, and yeah, and it was a beautiful moment to see that the youth is taking charge of this. We are taking matters in our own hands, and we are holding people accountable for climate change and climate injustices that has been happening for history, for centuries. And yeah, I am super happy to also be a part of this discussion and with the other amazing panelists. So thank you, Khadija, for passing the word to me. I really appreciate it. And yeah, I pass it back to you.
Thank you so much, Nigel. And I know that that moment and that ruling meant so much for you. And I'm very glad that you were able to come and join us this morning and just share from the heart, right? So, with that, we're going to start to get a little technical. And now we have Karuna Rana. And Karuna is a Fulbright scholar and award winning social entrepreneur from Mauritius. And she's the founding director of the Big Ocean States Initiative, a global island-led organization advancing sustainable blue economies instead. With over 15 years of experience in science, policy, and community organizing, Karuna is also co-founder of SYAH, the only regional network focused on environmental sustainability across Africa and Asian island developing nations. So, Karuna, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Khadija, and I hope I pronounce your name correctly.
Yeah.
Okay, so thank you, and thank you to the team Rise Up as well, and congrats on the Ocean and Climate Cluster. Really look forward to engaging with that. And hi, everyone, no matter which part of the world you are from. It's very exciting to be here, especially with people who deeply care about the ocean, and especially not just the ocean, but the link with climate and the communities that live around the ocean. This is very important for us, especially me. I come from Mauritius, which is an island nation, or what the UN calls a small island developing state, but what we've coined as a big ocean state, rather. So I will be talking a bit about the ocean climate nexus, but from a UNFCCC lens, also talking a little about the plastics negotiations and how all of this ties into what we are doing, but we'll be talking about this, especially from a global south and an island lens. So I'm going to share my slides. I forgot to do that. There we go. All right. Okay, I guess everyone can see my slides.
Yes.
Okay, so great. So first things first, I know everyone knows this, but it's still important to reiterate because we don't act like we know it, at least when it comes to policy making. The ocean is the largest climate regulator on Earth, absorbing over 90% of excess heat, almost 30% of carbon emissions. There was a report that came out from the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy in 2023 that said ocean-based climate solutions can deliver up to 35% of annual greenhouse gas emission cuts needed in 2050 to limit global temperature rise by 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that's pretty big. And these solutions would be ranging from decarbonizing shipping to offshore renewable energy, blue carbon ecosystems, and all of that. And finally, we also know, and it's very important to reiterate, that ocean health and climate justice are intertwined, particularly for big ocean states and coastal communities whose cultures, economies, and food systems depend on it. But what is actually going on at the UNFCCC? So the good news is that we have something called the Ocean and Climate Change Dialogue that was born out of COP25, formalized in COP26 and 27. The subsidiary body for scientific and technological advice chair was invited to hold an annual ocean and climate change dialogue to strengthen ocean-based action. So that is mandated. And the mandate involves this dialogue to strengthen ocean-based action under the Paris Agreement, identify ways ocean can be better integrated in mitigation, adaptation, and support, whether it's finance, tech transfer, capacity, and also mandated to feature party-led discussions and multi-stakeholder contributions with a strong emphasis on scientific and indigenous knowledge. And the last bit is very important because that was key, and a lot of these mandates were pushed forward by small island states and scientific and indigenous knowledge communities. So the latest from the June 2025 SB 62 session that we just had, some of the key themes related to this dialogue included there needs to be more institutional coordination within the UNFCCC system. There needs to be a better recognition of traditional knowledge in ocean climate strategies, and also call for an operationalization of ocean-based mitigation and adaptation. Why is this important to talk about? Because right now what we have is a mandate, an annual mandate to have an ocean and climate change dialogue. But there is a difference between a dialogue versus integrating it within the UNFCCC formal process itself. So dialogue is not integration, as I mentioned. The UNFCCC process still lacks systemic mechanisms to embed ocean action within its architecture. So the NDCs, or the nationally determined contributions that are submitted by countries on how they will be tackling climate change. Sorry, I have a sore throat, so I will be coughing a little. But yeah, so going back to the NDCs, it's important to understand that countries had submitted their NDCs and they're asked to revise them every 5 years. And there was an NDC synthesis report that happened in 2023. And if you look at it, only 97 out of 148 NDCs included coastal and marine. Sorry, I need to drink some water. Sorry about that. But going back to this, so if you look at the 2023 report, only 97 countries out of 148 included coastal and marine mechanisms, which was very little if you look at the size of the ocean that we have. But small island developing states have been ahead because a 2024 analysis by UNCTAD found out that 36 out of 39 SIDS have had at least one ocean-related measure in their current NDCs. There was also an analysis that just came out by UNSW in 2025, because early in 2025, we had a new set of NDCs that were submitted. And out of the 28 new and updated NDCs submitted, 20 of those came from ocean and coastal countries, with 17 containing at least one ocean-based climate target, policy, or measure. So that is good news. You would think that it's definitely moving forward, but not as much, because the NDCs are still lagging behind in terms of the level of ambition that we need. If we have to achieve the goals of the Paris Agreement and the targets of the Global Biodiversity Fund, ocean-based solutions must be explicitly included and prioritized within international climate negotiations and frameworks. A dialogue is not enough. We also had a blue NDC challenge that has gained so much traction, but it still remains politically under-leveraged. Climate finance lags behind. The GCF and GEF have yet to adopt structured ocean-focused investment frameworks. And as I mentioned, there is no formal anchoring of ocean dialogue outcomes in COP decisions. Countries face no clear guidance or accountability mechanisms. And we also have common metrics and indicators for ocean action in NDCs and national adaptation plans missing. Governance remains siloed between all these different frameworks. I know Jeremy will be talking about BBNJ, but there are so many more frameworks that need to be aligned. And stakeholders from SIDS, indigenous populations, coastal communities continue to struggle for meaningful access and influence in these spaces. I also want to quickly touch upon plastics, which is not just a waste problem. As we speak right now, the world is negotiating on a global UN plastic treaty, because plastics are fossil fuel-based products. We often forget that. They emit more carbon dioxide than the aviation industry, and if they were a country, they would be the 5th largest emitter. If we continue producing the way we do, plastic pollution will account for 20% oil use, 15% global carbon budget. And all of this is to say that climate change has to go hand in hand with plastics as well. And not just they come from fossil fuel, they also integrate into marine food webs, and they disrupt the carbon sequestration potential of the ocean. So the ocean climate pollution nexus is very real. It's a lived urgent reality by Global South, especially for small island states and global and coastal communities. So moving forward, in the interest of time, I'm not going to read all of this, but I do want to point out that the ICG opinion played such a big role and now strengthens the case to fully integrate ocean into the UNFCCC, not just as an afterthought, but as a climate frontline. The 2025 is such a critical year. We've had the UNOC conference. It's a 10-year mark for the Paris Agreement. There is COP30 that is coming up. So it's such an important year, and that's where we need to be talking more about this. Definitely, ocean-dependent countries need multilateralism that delivers, not just declarations, but finance, technology, and voice. And most importantly, I want to talk about this point, which has to do with climate and blue finance. Right now, climate and blue finance still fails to support large-scale ocean climate solutions, but also small-scale community-led projects. If we go by the data, out of the 100 largest corporations that operate within just 8 ocean industry, 65% of total revenues in 2018 actually were accounted by the offshore oil and gas industry, followed by shipping-related industry. If we looked at offshore wind, it was less than 1%, and that's where the ocean climate solution lies. So there needs to be more funding that goes there. And we also can't talk about ocean climate action without being careful with deep sea mining. It's it's important to acknowledge that this is a big threat. And I know a lot of countries continue to talk about deep sea mining and exploration and extractive practices as part of their blue economy strategy, which beats the whole purpose because its potential to release carbon, destroy ecosystems, and deepen inequities is very, very strong. And lastly, it's important that the blue economy that we talk about, as I mentioned, it acts as a climate lever, but we need to get the design right. It means regenerative practices, for example, seaweed-based solutions, offshore renewable energy. There's so much we can do when we talk about the blue economy, not just by the big ocean states, but worldwide. And it's very important that we treat it as a regenerative and climate lever rather than extraction. So I don't know how much time I have, but I just want to end by saying that at the Big Ocean States Initiative, we firmly believe that Big Ocean that SIDS, or rather Big Ocean states, have such a big role to play. And that's why we are working to put forward ocean innovation, impact, and leadership from islands. And we'll continue to do that. Ocean climate is a big part of our focus area. And that's why we integrate in a lot of our work. We will be integrating ocean-based climate solutions, whether it's offshore renewable energy, whether it's looking for funding for small-scale projects that otherwise wouldn't get it, whether it's advocating for these big voices. And that's about it. So thank you so much. And thank you for bearing with me with me being under the weather with a bad sore throat. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Karuna, especially like you mentioned, since you're not feeling very well. Really appreciate you taking the time and showing up and delivering this excellent presentation. I think after seeing it, that maybe I design a separate session afterwards to give you more time to dive a little deeper into the ocean climate dialogue, because I think you were covering some really key and important points. And I love that you said dialogue is not integration, because that is very true. And the blue economy can be a climate lever. But the piece that everybody needs to take home is if we get the design right. And that's very important. So I really, like I said, appreciate you taking the time, coming to share with us. And now we will move on to our next speaker, Jeremy, who is going to talk a little bit on BBNJ. So Jeremy is a social work conservationist and senior program officer at IUCN, supporting 11 African coastal states with ratifying and implementing the BBNJ agreement. And he previously served as climate and ocean advisor to the Seychelles UN mission and is an alumnum of the OASIS Fellowship. Jeremy brings experience in both national and international ocean governance and holds degrees from the University of Cape Town, TU Dresden, I hope I'm saying that right, and Columbia University. So, Jeremy, thank you so much for joining us, and the floor is yours.
Good day, everyone, and thank you, Rise Up team, for having me today. I hope my slides is coming through okay. Let me know if that's all good. Yes, I see that's good. Great. So yeah, it's a real pleasure to be joining you today to speak about, I think, the intersection of two of my personal experiences of the last 3 years, being involved in the international system. I have to admit, especially as being Alliance of Small Island States fellow, climate change was very much what I was, I would say, 90% focused on for quite a while. But while I was a fellow at the AOSIS, the Biodiversity Beyond National Jurisdiction Agreement, which actually has a longer name than those 4 letters, actually started to become a real thing after 20 plus years of pre-negotiations, in a sense. So yeah, my presentation will be a little bit kind of dry, but I will also actually talk about why it doesn't have to be dry and why we don't have to be lawyers, and why when it comes to policy and when we start thinking about it beyond the silos that often we find ourselves in, why it can go beyond the kind of text I will show on the screen. So just to set some context, and before going into the exact part of where climate and BBNJ is all this, I wanted to point out that the BBNJ agreement is the 3rd implementing agreement of the UN Convention on Law of the Seas. Before that, we might be familiar with what is the 1994 agreement, which is what has created the International Seabed Authority and is what is meant to govern international deep seabed mining in areas beyond national jurisdiction. We also might be familiar with the UN Fish Stocks Agreement, which comes after the regional fishery management organizations that have been around to manage tuna and other fish stocks that find themselves in international waters. And the BBNJ agreement, which has the objectives of sustainable use and conservation, is the first actual implemented agreement of the UN Convention on the Seas that focuses on conservation and sustainable use. So it's a huge endeavor, and I won't pretend that this presentation will give a complete overview, but I want to give us a taste of this. The BBNJ agreement can be really understood as 4 agreements in one. Really, the first part of it focuses on marine genetic resources. So what may be ingredients for tomorrow's pharmaceutical products. Think about the next cures for maybe cancer. I mean, in part, we know some of the ingredients or some of the parts for COVID-19 came from the ocean. So there's quite a lot of interest in thinking about these genetic resources and how they are shared, not just their monetary benefits, but also their non-monetary benefits. And, estimates are not just billions, but tens of billions in terms of worth here. And the areas beyond national jurisdiction are known as the common heritage of humankind. So the BBNJ agreement starts to think about how this may be shared. And it's quite complex, you can imagine a divide between several different countries. The second part is what we call the area-based management tools, which includes marine protected areas. So this is what a lot of focus is on for the 30 by 30 goal. How are we going to get from approximately 8% of the ocean, give or take, depending on who you ask, and only about 1.2% of the ocean that's nobody's, this common heritage or international waters. So how do we get from 1.2 or from 8% in a sense to that 30%? The marine protected areas that BBNJ agreement could create is a big discussion point. Another part is the environmental impact assessments. And I think when it comes to climate change, I'll speak a little bit more to that because I think that's quite where we find ourselves in terms of where the policy and the wording is. And the last part, substantively, really focuses on the capacity building and transfer of marine technology, what a lot of us will call the means of implementation. How will developing countries, especially big ocean states like Seychelles or Mauritius, or other countries that are not maybe one of the countries that has giant fleets of fishing or research vessels, how will we as countries who have not historically benefited from the ocean or been part of the ocean as much, how will we meet our obligations on this? There's also cross-cutting issues, which include finance, setup of the BBNJ agreement, and all that to say is right now for the preparatory commissions, these institutional arrangements and cross-cutting issues are being discussed. And to end on that background note for BBNJ, 52 countries and the European Union have ratified the BBNJ agreement. It's been very fast. It's record-breaking speeds, actually. And by the UN General Assembly in September, 60 countries will have probably deposited their ratifications, and that will trigger an entry into force. About 120 days later, the BBNJ agreement will begin to actually work. And it's a case that we will see the first conference of parties probably in 2026. So with all that said, let's get more into what we're talking about, the intersection of climate and BBNJ. As I mentioned, it's very important for us to think about the general objective of BBNJ, which is really around conservation and sustainable use of marine biological diversity beyond national jurisdiction. So everything that's in international water that is life, except for fish, which we can get into another point. This is a controversial point, but we can get into it. But really, when we're thinking marine biodiversity beyond national jurisdiction is covered underneath this agreement. Just to bring some life into what I'm talking about here, I love this map because it really shows, one, the economic exclusive zones of all our countries. So that 200 nautical miles from our coastlines, that white area, as you can see on your screen, that is belonging to people, belonging to nations. But now you see the area that is not white, that is not a landmass. This is this huge amount of ocean, which is about 45% of the Earth's surface, 2/3 of the ocean. And this is what I'm talking about when I say areas beyond national jurisdiction, international waters, or high seas. I tend to not use high seas because that has some connotations of which might is right, finders is keepers. I prefer common heritage of humankind, global ocean, because then that leans into a more equitable view on this this vast area. And just to point out again, only about 1.2% of this areas beyond national jurisdiction has been protected. And that's a lot to do with Antarctica and a little bit in the Northeast Atlantic. So now that we have a better understanding of the scope of this agreement, I wanted to start getting into where climate change is mentioned. So again, not being a lawyer, but having gone from the AOSIS fellowship, we know the preamble is important, but we know it's not operational text. It's not something that's going to be legally binding to the states, but it definitely sets the tone. It definitely sets the arrangements by which we are focusing on what we're trying to do here. So climate change makes itself quite impactfully in the preamble. And so I think I highlight the word address because you can see maybe some discussions from loss and damage and what we've seen with the Santiago network and other aspects. The address word is often left out or forgotten, but clearly address here is a key part of what we're saying when we're talking about climate change, its impacts on the marine ecosystems. And when we're talking about warming, ocean deoxygenation and acidification, these are just some of the examples brought out. It is not by any means exhaustive. It is meant to be indicative here, so we can think of other impacts from climate change, but already from the preamble, here it is, climate change is being brought out. Now, this was something that I know the Global South, especially underneath the chairmanship of the State of Palestine, through the first couple of intergovernmental conferences, fought hard to include. So it was great that it was made a preamble, but at some point this was meant to be part of the operational text. And that's just a point to remember that, you know, these are statements and text that is heavily fought over. Something else that is really fought over, I won't name any countries, but you can imagine some very key members of OPEC, I won't give any more things away, fought very hard against having cumulative impacts included into the agreement's text. And this is really an innovation. We've never seen cumulative impacts, as far as I can tell, captured in this agreement as such, in other agreements, sorry, as such. And again, you see climate change, but also other anthropogenic impacts being brought in here. Now, this is cumulative impacts is mentioned about 8 times throughout the text. And apart from this instance in the use of terms, which applies across the agreement, it's all found in the environmental impact assessments section. And so this is showing that, yes, we can, in our EIAs, right, think about how are we not just looking at one impact here, another impact here. We can't look at them in silos. We have to say, no, when we're going to approve a particular activity, maybe it's fishing, maybe it's something else, and maybe fishing is the wrong word, but wrong example. But when we're going to have an activity in areas beyond national jurisdiction, how will that impact from that activity also you know, be worsened, be affected by other impacts from something like climate change? We clearly know we can't look at these things in silos. We need to take a more holistic view. So this is a huge innovation that I think as us who are in the climate and ocean space should really, really focus on. I can't begin to explain everything here, but I would love to have further conversations with people about what this means. But I wanted to draw attention to this very important innovation in terms of use of terms. The next part I wanted to just bring in again, where climate change is brought out, is in the general principles and approaches. So again, you can see this is going to apply across the document in terms of how we think about these area-based management tools being created. What is the environmental impact assessment? So when we're thinking about capacity building, transfer of marine technology, or when we're thinking about providing finance, all of this needs to take an approach that builds ecosystem resilience, that includes thinking about adverse effects of climate change. And, you know, there's examples within it. So again, there's some strong references to climate change here that will apply across the agreement. And again, I think it's important for us to really delve into that. The last point I want to make, and I don't have a slide on this, but I think as the ICJ has been mentioned, it's important to know that the ICJ's advisory opinion builds on the International Tribunal of the Law of the Sea's opinion. It is consistent with the ITLOS opinion. And so the BBNJ does have ITLOS as a fundamental court amongst 2 other free courts that are mentioned. But ITLOS is one of the key courts that the Conference of Parties of the BBNJ agreement can request information from and be consistent to. So I think this is a relationship also worth exploring when we're talking about climate and the BBNJ. That's in the agreement itself. Maybe just to say one last thing a little bit about the BBNJ agreement and this ratification pre-entry into force phase. Malawi, so is not one of the countries that I've been working directly with, but we had the great opportunity to engage them in a workshop in Mombasa in March. And they, along with Seychelles and Mauritius at the time, were the first free African countries to have ratified the agreement. And if we can go back to a map in our mind of where Malawi is, we understand it's a landlocked country, quite a small landlocked African country. And you'd wonder, why would Malawi not only be the third African country to have ratified the BBNJ agreement, but also the first landlocked country? And in their reasoning for ratification, one of those reasons was, well, we get impacted by cyclones. We get really impacted by cyclones that have been worsened by climate change. In us ratifying the BBNJ agreement, whether it's to create marine protected areas or area-based management tools for sequestration of carbon and otherwise, we see the BBNJ as a tool and we support it. Now, I'm very much paraphrasing there, but you can see how landlocked countries, right, those who are hundreds of kilometers from the ocean, can understand how connected they are to these areas beyond national jurisdiction and really what is the common heritage of humankind. So I hope I could end on that note, just to say this is for everyone. We look forward to the entering force and for another crazy schedule of COPs added to all the other COPs that we have, but hopefully the BBNJ, which is meant to be a missing piece to help us all coordinate, can really not just add more work, but begin to bring us all together. So thank you so much for your attention. I hope I kept to time. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Jeremy. This was super informative, and I appreciate you really taking, different articles out of the BBNJ to really highlight how climate change is being integrated. So thank you again for taking the time and everything else and really coming and sharing this knowledge with us. And I keep feeling like I need more sessions after this. So maybe, who knows, this is the start of a series and we could have more in-depth conversations and really dive further into a lot of the different issues that are coming up. And I just want to remind people that we do have a Q&A function. So if you have any questions at all for the speakers, feel free to drop it in the Q&A and our speakers will answer it. And we're going to keep moving because I'm looking at time. And now we're going to switch a little bit to some on-the-ground actions and solutions. So we have Nikita Shial-Roll, and Nikita is a Bahamian conservation. Why can't I say that word today? Conservation biologist and oceanpreneur, founder of Young Marine Explorers and the Cat Island Conservation Institute. And Nikita is widely known as the Eagle Ray Empress, and she champions community-based ocean education and conservation across the Bahamas, the wider Caribbean, and Africa. So, Nikita, welcome, and the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Khadija. Good morning, good afternoon, good night. It's a pleasure to be here. I'm just going to share my screen. I'm so grateful that I'm after just the order of the presentations, simply because I have been really challenged in these past, oops, I think I've lost everyone. Sorry, let me share my screen first, and then I'll start talking. Okay, perfect. Welcome. So I'm really grateful that landlocked nations was a topic right before me, because today I'm joining you, of course, from Miami, Bahamas, but also the Ethiopian Ocean Institute. And it's, an affirmation that the ocean belongs to everyone. We are one people on one planet, and there is one ocean. Geopolitics has given us many ways to slice and dice and separate, but at the end of the day, we share one home planet. And what that looks like for our collective community matters. And right now, there's a lot of inequality that exists, a lot of which is stems from colonial histories. And so with that, again, my name is Nikita Shial-Roll, and I'm so grateful to be here today. And I'm going to talk a little bit about the Grouper School, which is a global learning party. And it's a global learning solution for climate solution for ocean solutions and for all of us especially those of us in the global south. So as we've been talking about today, in Africa and the Caribbean, our communities are confronting severe environmental issues. Everything from rising sea levels, floods, droughts, coral bleaching, plastic pollution, extreme storms, and biodiversity loss. And what I recently told someone in a conversation that I was having with them is that, for those of us in the Caribbean, especially those of us in these coastal communities, this isn't theoretical. This isn't just like ocean science research because it's fun. This is ocean science research because this is about our survival. And we actually need to understand how things are changing. And we don't know enough. And I firmly believe that research skills are social justice tools, and our task is to train an army of women, youth, fishers, farmers, and their communities, armed not with guns, but rather with science, technology, engineering, art, music, and math. And I think especially for Caribbean people, the arts, music, this is where our souls resonate naturally, and with the ocean, we are of the ocean. There's no way, if you're from an island, you can't separate yourself from the ocean. And even when I'm in the mountains, I'm in Ethiopia right now, and people often ask me, like, do you miss the ocean? And it's kind of like, well, of course one misses the ocean, but also I am the ocean, and I think there's a part of the ocean in all of us who are people who live by the sea and of the sea. And this is why I believe that conversations about rising sea levels, floods, droughts, biodiversity loss, extreme weather events, ocean acidification, this isn't just about science. It's about how we ensure that mothers and fathers who live in coastal communities don't get washed out to sea, and that mountain families don't die of starvation. And the thing is, you can't separate the connection between the ocean and climate. The ocean regulates our climate. So weather patterns in landlocked parts of our planet, landlocked, land-linked, whichever you prefer. But in these land-linked parts of the continent, their weather patterns are impacted by what happens in the ocean. And if we don't understand that, we're going to continue to see these droughts. And one of the biggest conversations that exist, I think, right now is the challenges that we are faced with data deficiencies. And there's just this absence of accurate and timely data, which represents a significant barrier to action. We see a lot of projects or activities that happen, money being spent on things that don't actually make sense and don't actually serve our communities. And so without data, communities struggle to implement effective climate adaptation measures, and policymakers are left without the necessary information to develop sustainable ocean management practices. And more importantly, a lot of these conversations that we're having, all these COP meetings, communities aren't part of it. And we just have to be real about where we are with everything. The lack of financing, the neocolonial systems and structures that are driving ocean science that then informs our policy. These are serious issues and barriers to our progress as a collective people, our survival as humanity, and the most vulnerable. And so with that, data deficiencies directly compromise the resilience of communities, leaving us vulnerable to the escalating impacts of climate change. And this requires resourcing, So what we have is a solution. And I listened to a climate analytics talk last night, and it's the Climate Ocean Biodiversity Nexus. It's a great lecture. I encourage you to listen to it. But what I appreciated was one of the speakers talked about false solutions. And I think this is really important because so much money gets put behind some of these big ideas that are driven by these Western universities and people who've been, in ivory towers. And just because something theoretically makes sense doesn't mean it actually is of service to those of us on the ground. But the speaker in this climate analytics talk referenced false solutions. And I think this is so important because just because it is a solution and just because it's well financed does not mean it serves us. And I think we, as the people on the ground in the most vulnerable communities, it's that much more incumbent upon us to really understand our realities so we don't get anyone just walking into our community implementing these false solutions that either A, make external people money and don't serve our communities, or just don't work and our communities are even at greater risk. So with that being said, the Grouper School is a training academy for community scientists, and community scientists are how I believe that we can leapfrog our collective community into this discourse, into the new and emerging economies around, you know, the blue economy, and even the more controversial, challenging conversations around carbon sequestration and the carbon markets. And I believe that if the carbon, they already exists, right? The Article 6 already exists. The carbon markets are in place. If communities are not truly at the table, we will be completely taken advantage of. And so this is why a lot of the work that we do with the Grouper School is about connecting communities with technology, ensuring that communities have the ability, we have a research lab and a container that we're building out for our global classrooms. And this gives local communities cutting edge technology. We installed in one of our communities in the Bahamas a weather station, you know, and again, it's about how do we not only ensure that communities have access to real-time data. This is when one of the hurricanes was passing north of the Bahamas. But then also, how do we ensure that if our governments are engaging in the sale of carbon in carbon markets, that the science is sound. And right now there's not enough science. And so I think when we have more of the community at the table engaging in understanding the science, driving the questions, analyzing the data with that local context, then we will have more robust policy and be able to address some of our realities. So the Grouper School focuses on training, you know, guardians of our natural resources. This is some of our team members in Cat Island. And right now, these are some of our communities who are gearing up for our next grouping. So we have a high focus in Africa and the Caribbean. And again, the whole focus of the Grouper School is not only to build capacity and transfer technology, but to really ensure that local communities, youth, those of us who are on the ground and the most vulnerable are in positions of power, and we can start to redistribute power shifts that have existed for so long due to our colonial histories, and also colonial science, which is driving primarily how both we understand climate, and then also how we are choosing to respond. And so with that, I think I have about a minute left. I just want to say that financing is everything. The systems aren't fair, and we have to be extraordinarily creative in order for us to get access to the resources that our communities need so that we can start to create this shift. And so with that, that's why I'm really happy to share that, you know, the Ethiopian Ocean Institute is a new collaboration, really trying to highlight and drive focus for landlocked communities, and also all of us, coastal communities and SIDS, because what is wild as far as ocean science investment, you've got landlocked countries at the bottom, and then you have SIDS right above that. And all we have is ocean and SIDS, right? So there's clearly something that is not making sense. And I think we have to be a lot more intentional about how we drive the change in our future. So with that, thank you so much for today's conversation. I would love to connect with everyone. You can find me on LinkedIn. And I hope to see you at one of our Grouper School parties in the future. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Nikita. You touched on a lot of different things, some heavy things inside of there as well that I wish we had so much more time to unpack. And I'm really glad that you also mentioned the issue of false solutions as well as, you know, solutions being handed down and then they fail, which is inevitable. And we've seen that time and time and time again, especially being from the Caribbean. And yeah, but I really love, you know, the empowering the community and letting the community be the ones to hold the power, to hold the data, to challenge how, we implement these solutions, to look at the science, to let them be the ones in charge. Because without that community engagement and everything else, we oftentimes, like you said, see projects just, dwindle out, right? Because the community is the one on the ground really at the core and at the center of the work. So really thank you for bringing that to the forefront of the conversation today and really sharing more on the group of school. And with that, we're going to jump straight into the next speaker one time. We have Elias David, and Elias is a marine scientist and founder of Sustainable Ocean Alliance Tanzania. He is leading youth-driven ocean and climate initiatives. He serves as a marine conservation warden, country coordinator for I wait WIOECSN, and is active in several global youth leadership platforms. His work focuses on mangrove and seagrass restoration, ocean literacy, and empowering coastal communities in Tanzania. So the floor is yours.
Thank you so much, Khadija, and thank you for a wonderful introduction. I'm happy to thank you for having me in this nice conversation, and I learned a lot from the previous speakers, to be honest. So I am happy to share with you some of the blue carbon solutions that we have within SOI, and by any time that you don't see my side or anything, just feel free to let me know.
All good.
Cool, thanks. I'm finding a way to. Thank you. So welcome. My name is Alice David, and I'm just going to share with you what we have been doing with the coastal communities. We at SOA Tanzania, we are
Is it my internet?
the blue carbon ecosystems that we are working together with the local coastal communities in Tanzania to restore their status, but also we are focusing on empowering these young people in the local coastal communities to find ways in like sustainable blue economy, natural-based solutions to empower them in various different ways that I'm also going to share with between my slides. So yeah, as we are focusing on empowering young people in the low coastal communities, mainly to restore our ocean health and sustainability. So most of our activities and projects, their ultimate goal is to restore the ocean health and sustainability. So we are a youth threads legally registered in Tanzania as a youth aid NGO here in Tanzania, but we're also a national hub for a global international organization, which is known as Sustainable Ocean Alliance, focusing on creating empowerment for young people in the low coastal communities in ocean conservation and sustainable economy. So our approach is very simple. As I said, we are building a generation restoration. So we train young people in the low coastal communities to understand first about the status of our ocean, and globally, and also in our own perspective, in the local perspective, to understand what are the challenges that our ocean in Tanzania and the Indian Ocean as a region in the local perspective, like what are the things that we are facing and what can we do and the ways we can do it together. So we give them training and mentorship, and also we take actions to restore and create some innovative solutions to empower them. So today I'm going to highlight our blue carbon ecosystem solutions. One of it is the Mikokwetu project. Mikokwetu, it's a Swahili word which means our mangrove project. It's focusing on empowering young people in the low coastal communities to restore our mangrove ecosystems. So we adapt mangrove areas in Tanzania that needs conservation, protection, and restoration. And then we train young people in the low coastal communities on how to restore and conserve these mangrove ecosystems. And then we take actions to go plant. We use both methods, like direct planting and nursery planting. And also we we develop together with the local communities on sustainable blue economic activities that they can do within this mangrove ecosystem so that they can also be empowered economic wise. We also have the Grass Underwater project, which is a UN Ocean Decade endorsed project. So if you go around different places in the world, many of us usually speak about the mangroves and coral reef, but seagrass have been not getting the attention, mostly in many of different areas that I've been hearing. So seagrass is also one of the blue carbon ecosystem, which is very important, and it's actually linked. It's a linking ecosystem between mangroves and coral reefs. You start with the mangrove, then you meet seagrass, then you go deeper to meet the coral reefs. So this is one of the not so much spoken about ecosystem. So what we do first is to give the seagrass the spotlight it deserves, for people to understand what seagrass is, what are the functions of the ecosystem, and even for them to understand why we need seagrass existence and how we can conserve and restore the seagrass ecosystem. To be honest, it's one of the areas that we've been running constantly, how to conserve it and how to restore. And we have several research that have been conducted in Tanzania on the methodology on seagrass restoration that we have been practicing. So we have been also working with our young people in Tanzania and the coastal communities to restore, adapt, and monitor these seagrass meadows that we have in Tanzania. So as I said, we also provide training for young people to understand, like, what should they do, how should they do it. So we have an annual training program where we train young people and also local communities to understand how they should do and how they should act for these ecosystems, and how we can monitor and accelerate and scale the solutions on our blue carbon ecosystems. So we have the blue economy projects. So these are blue economic projects that the local communities and young people integrate within the blue carbon ecosystems, like the mangroves, I said, and the seagrass ecosystems. We have projects around seaweed processing. They process seaweed into different products like seaweed oil, seaweed lotions, and in the whole value chain of the seaweed. We also have project on mangrove honey. So we have beekeeping in the mangrove ecosystems, where the coastal communities go and practice beekeeping honey, to create mangrove honey in the mangrove ecosystems. So these are many of the ways that we are working on to empower these communities and coastal communities to learn how to sustainably utilize the ocean natural resources, and not only thinking about the overfishing practices that have been conducting for a very long time, but also to think about how we sustainably use the ocean natural resources to coexist between the community, our needs, our demands, because we can never remove the demand of the coastal communities. They need firewood, they need timber, and they have been using these ocean resources for a very long time. Now they have seen the destruction they have caused, so we need to come up with ways that they can sustainably utilize the ocean natural resources, rather than just tell them that you are not allowed to cut the mangrove trees, you're not allowed to do this and that, but we also need to teach them how they can sustainably utilize and find and improve their own livelihood, because they by 100% depends on the ocean for their livelihood, like as a source of livelihood and income. So yeah, since we started in 2021, these are some of the things that we have achieved in this project. We have planted over 42,500 mangrove trees in 5,000 hectares of mangrove that we have adapted and we are working on, and we have 100 square kilometers of seagrass meadow that we have adapted. As I said, that we adapt an area and we formalize having a local community and young people who will be working on that area, monitoring, planting, and developing these blue carbon ecosystems. We have projects on blue economy, and we have a community of 695 young people and local communities. So yeah, you can get involved in these solutions by sharing about our stories and projects, and also being part of the community, or you can even support our ocean projects. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, Elias. That was some very impressive KPIs, I must say. And I love the fact that you mentioned, we cannot remove the demand or the needs of the community. At the end of the day, like you said, they've been using the ocean for years, and it's very hard to just go and say, just stop doing X, Y, and Z. because what happens to your livelihood, what happens to your families, etc. So it's all about finding that balance and encouraging sustainable use as well as restoration of so many of the resources that we have. And as you mentioned, the mangrove honey, I was just like, oh, I had mangrove honey in Guatemala and it was so good. So now I'm tempted to taste the mangrove honey in Tanzania to see if it compares. No competition, just letting you know that I have high expectations. So when I make it back, I expect some mangrove honey to taste. But yeah, so we'll move on to our next speaker, Melody Saunders Brenner, especially looking at the time. So Melody is the executive director of Reef Life Foundation and the CEO of IntelliReefs. A leader in marine restoration, she applies advanced nanoscience and material casting to design habitat structures that restore and protect coral ecosystems. Her work drives scalable, science-based solutions to global reef loss. So, Melody, I think you're our last speaker, so we take to you now to tell us all about your coral reef innovation.
Okay, bless you. Thank you. Everyone has been astonishing. And just to give a little tiny bit of history, I think it was 15 years ago. It was like in 2010 to 2014. We have a nanomaterial science company, and we took it on as a challenge. Coral people came to us and said, you guys understand nanoparticle activation. You understand how to build all these different types of material systems. Why can't you just invent a coral reef? What's wrong with you people? So we took it on as a challenge and said, okay, what does it have to be? I don't know if you guys saw Chasing Coral, but Dr. Ruth Gates was our inspiration. And she said it has to be 8.1. It has to look and feel and smell and taste exactly like a coral reef. So it has to have this rugosity. It has to have this interior space so that when coral spawn are leaving, they have something to attach to and settle on and make a home within. And it took us about a decade to figure out how to do this and make sure that we did it correctly. And how can we, let's see if I can do this. Can you guys see this?
Yes.
Do we have it?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. You can see that there is a slide on the left that has the rock. This is different types of pozzolanic minerals, and most reefs are made out of pozzolanic minerals. That is volcanic rock, but you need limestone, you need aragonite, you need the minerals for each location is site and species specific. So our goal was to make a changeable mixture so that an engineer could say, I need this kind of strength for this kind of habitat in this kind of place. And I want it to be able to withstand this type of wind, this type of wave. I want it to grow corals and kelp. And we have been testing this all over. This is one of the, we call it oceanite. And this is a reefscape of oceanite that we launched in Canada. And you can see the different curving aspects of this rock system. And each section of it is for a different type of species. These are raceways for different sizes of fish. The impetus behind it is that it's location specific. It's low maintenance. It increases biodiversity and habitat capacity. It is self-healing. It feeds and increases fish and invertebrate populations. It increases over time its material strength and durability. It accelerates and targets biological growth. It is a nature-based carbon offset and is a risk mitigation for high waves, for SIDS, for an ocean side to an island that is going to get hit by a larger storm. No toxic leaching, neutral pH, long-term carbon sequestration, increased storm and wave protection. Our goal is, how do we make a substrate that attracts and settles every type of creature? We do have a foundation, and I put the, we have Blue Ocean Brain Trust, and I put the link in the chat, and that is for communities all over the world to bring their story, bring their community needs, bring their cultural association of what they do as a culture to the lives of the cultures around the world, because we know that collaboration is the mantra of moving things forward. If we are not going to collaborate, then all of these different elements don't work as well as we wish they would work. One of the projects that, let's see if I'm still sharing. Yeah, okay. One of the projects that we are in tune with is tourism and large-scale restoration. I wanted you guys to see what this oceanite looks like close up. So those are pozzolanic minerals, and you see the little holes in between the rocks. When this is in the ocean, coral polyps, kelp spores, whatever is washing around in the ocean is attracted to this because of its smell, because of its texture, because of this rugosity. And I do have the biodiversity counts and the fish counts of how many fish are biting off of this every 15 seconds in an eelgrass bed that had nothing. So the beauty of having oceanite in the system, whether it's in a little inlet, whether it is in a huge coastal protection system, which we are in negotiations with a lot of the larger Asian countries. They want a massive oceanite module system. They want to be able to grow what they want to eat. They want to be able to grow more squid. They want to be able to grow more fish that they are used to eating. Because of ocean degradation, there isn't a growth field, if you want to call it a field, that aquaculture people can say, I wish I had a farm in this specific section of the ocean that would grow this. We talked about people growing inventory for island businesses, and we have an incredible project that we're in planning of the kelp, women in kelp in South Africa. And each one of these kelp companies is using their kelp, cosmetics, biomedical, all of these kinds of stuff. They do have orders for their kelp from China, but their goal is to keep it within their businesses, keep that inventory coming back to them in their businesses and building it. So now we are in the process of having these manufacturing systems on a vessel. So if you're 45 miles out, and I loved that map that had the white of this is where the country owns, but this 45 miles out is this interconnected community of the ocean, and it could be used for farming. And that's what these larger oceanite modules are used for. And if you can cast on a vessel and seed per species on a vessel, then you can put it in the ocean very easily, and it becomes a magnet for the other biodiversity that's losing its strength now. I see things going in the water and they're growing one species. Just look at all of us on this web this morning were not all the same. We didn't all grow up in Des Moines, Iowa, or Zimbabwe, or wherever. Each of us brings a different element to this space. And each of us can have a farm if they had the right farming materials. And one of the beauties of putting the IntelliReefs in, and I put a little movie thing in there in the chat, we did a project. Oh, am I supposed to be quiet now? Okay. Y'all look at the movies. I think I have 1 minute, but okay, I'm gonna tell the quick story about putting it in a degraded harbor in Halifax. Everyone said nothing will grow on this. 4 months later, after a full freeze, full of kelp and full of all kinds of species all by itself. So our goal is to let Mother Nature heal herself with a proper tool. Bless you and thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much, Melody. And I am so sorry to cut you short.
No!
No, but it was super interesting, and I have so much more questions on IntelliReefs and the technology that you have been using, and I'm sure some of our panel, some of the participants have questions. So feel free to drop the questions in the Q&A, or you could connect on LinkedIn and really flood Melody with questions and let her know that you came from the Rise Up webinar.
Awesome.
Yeah. And on that note, let me see if we have time. I think we have time for one question. So if anybody have any burning question that they really need to get off their chest, now is the time. If not, I will go ahead and wrap up.
There was a question about sharing the slides. If that's
yeah. Well, let me ask the speakers if they would be interested in sharing the slides afterwards. I see a yes from Melody. So yeah, Elias, share his slide. Yeah.
Yes, for me.
Okay. A yes from Jeremy as well.
Yes.
And yeah, okay. No yes from Nikita. Yeah, okay. All right. So
Yes, for me too.
all
How do
right.
you
So
want us,
pardon?
do we just send them to you?
Yeah, you can just send them to me and then I'll share afterwards as well as the recording to all the participants. So on that note, I would just like to thank everybody for being part of today's session. We've heard some powerful insights from the urgent need to better integrate ocean governance into the UNFCCC processes, to emerging opportunities within international frameworks like the BBNJ agreement. Jeremy's reflections on embedding climate language into BBNJ reminded us that this is not only a question of visibility, but of legal coherence and accountability. And it's so important for us to align ocean and climate governance to ensure that our collective responses match the interconnected nature of this overall crisis. And at the same time, in this conversation, we were grounded in action from things like ocean literacy, youth empowerment, coral innovation, mangrove and seagrass restoration. We saw how community-led, science-informed solutions are already making a difference. And these efforts are not only responding to climate impacts, they are reimagining how we care for and relate to the ocean. Nikita mentioned that with the existing framework, that creativity will be our answer. And I think that based on the presentations from today, we definitely saw a lot of creativity. And as we look ahead towards COP30 in Belém, building on the momentum from UNOC, it is clear that the ocean and climate cannot be treated in silos. Like, time for that to just come to an end. We are deeply linked, and the Nexus must be central to both climate policy, finance, exclamation mark on the finance, and advocacy moving forward. And today's webinar is also, like I mentioned in the beginning, in conjunction with the launch of our recent Ocean and Climate Cluster, which is a space to bring together frontline leadership, build knowledge, and catalyze coordinated action. So I would like to invite all of you in the session today to join the Ocean and Climate Cluster. I believe Natalie will drop the link in the chat. And yeah, on behalf of the Rise Up team, I just want to thank once again our speakers, the participants, and everybody for bringing the energy and for just sharing and creating a welcoming space for this conversation. We would have many more of these to come. This was just, a little teaser, the intro, really getting everybody toes wet, but we're going to dive deeper into some of the topics as we move on throughout the year. So with that, a next big thank you, and I guess enjoy the rest of your day, afternoon, night,